I'm Dawn Yankelove, Executive Director of TALK, the Technology Association of Louisville, Kentucky. We are in the middle of our TALK Cybersecurity Summit today. This is our 11 a.m. Government panel. How should we define data care for government and for its citizens? And so I'm going to have each panelist just introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to cover some hot topics. So James.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is James Meese. I'm Louisville Metro's Chief Information Security Officer.
David?
Yes, I'm David Carter. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer with Commonwealth Office of Technology. My office is in charge of infrastructure security for the executive branch of state government.
And Clint?
Hello, everybody. My name is Clint Walker. I am one of the regional cybersecurity advisors for the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Thank you.
So we have a lot to talk about today. First up is hot news, right? So we've seen hacks of the pipeline, hacks of meat packing facilities. We've talked about solar winds in the everyday news coverage. So where do you think the attention needs to go for government and also for our citizens? What are some of these things that we have to deal with? We want to talk maybe briefly about ransomware. Clint, you want to jump in on, how do we even begin to, keep going with what's up ahead of us?
That's a very difficult question because right now ransomware is the biggest thing that we're seeing out there. I mean, just today alone, I have 3 emails on incident response I have to go and deal with once I'm done with this panel. A hospital in Savannah, as well as, school districts in Mississippi and Alabama and Florida. Everybody's getting hit. And that's the big thing is right now, you have to look at yourself and you have to say, how would I deal with this? You have to start preparing. You have to start exercising your plan and looking at, your vulnerabilities, because a lot of the vulnerabilities that we're seeing that the threat actors are using are, once again, they're old vulnerabilities. You just have to patch. I know it's a buzzword, but you really have to start looking at network segmentation, zero trust networks. So even if you do get hit by ransomware, it's contained to a small part of your network and doesn't impact your overall operations, or you minimize the impact to it. You need to look at your backups. How often are you doing them? When are you doing them? Are they online, offline? Do you have another site to go to? Because once again, we're the federal government, we're always going to tell you, please don't pay the ransom, because it just perpetuates the problem. And you got to restore from backup. You got to be vigilant too, because we're starting to see a trend in moving away from ransomware, or at least direct ransomware, into extortionware, where not only are they encrypting your data, they've stolen your data first. And then they want to hold your data ransom, saying, hey, we know that you could pay us, you could restore from backup, but if you don't, pay us, we're going to release all your data to the public. So especially for regulated industries and things like that, or people that have, PII data that could suffer fines from all of that's a big deal for them, is that a lot of times they're looking at, hey, I can't let that data go public if it's got intellectual property in it. I think the last time I talked to the FBI, they were saying that the average ransomware victim, that the threat actor's been in their network for 95 days before they detonate. So you got to be able to look at your, your logs and see, do I have somebody in there? What is my normal? What is baseline? And then the last thing I'll talk about really is asset management. You have to know what's on your network. A lot of these incidents we get called in on, it's because they had something on their network that nobody knew about, or they didn't understand that their operational technologies were now riding on their IT backbone, and they had, back doors open from their badge access system, or their, HVAC system, environmental control systems, or camera systems. We're seeing the threat actors find every little way they can to get into the networks. So once again, you gotta prep yourself. You gotta prepare. User training. Don't click on links. Don't open attachments. You got to just keep, getting that through your users' heads, because it only takes one person doing the wrong thing, and then your whole organization could be down, or you could be facing lots of fines, or having to, pay a ransom that you don't really want to pay, because they're really leveraging that, once again, your data against you.
James, what are you seeing at the government level, at city government? Are there new policies you put into place, et cetera?
We saw a little bit of a change due to the telework that COVID brought on us. But for us, being resilient means continuous improvement in our security controls. Always look for the next thing you can put in place to help tighten up your controls. Always reassess, continue to reassess. Make yourself the highest hanging fruit, right? You don't want to be the easiest person to hack out there, and maybe you won't be the person that gets popped. We focus on never stopping making ourselves better, never stopping improving our controls, and we focus on being a very responsive security group as well. No instance too small. Every phishing attack, every network probe, we treat them the same, as they could be the thing that causes us to, fall prey to the things that Clint was mentioning. Nothing's too small.
Yeah, we're at the state level, we're looking at things from a three-pronged approach when it comes to particular, but all malicious code type threats. You've got the preventing it from getting in your environment, responding to it if it gets in your environment, and then recovering from it if it actually takes effect. So you've got that three-pronged approach that you have to look at. On the prevention side, your strongest defense is absolutely a well-informed workforce, because the most prevalent way that this gets in your environment is through things like phishing and things that are targeting your users. The bad guys know that we have good edge defenses. We've spent years building those. We've got really good investments on our edges. They're not attacking our gates anymore. What they're doing is they're attacking the user. So, having a really strong user awareness program, we fish all of our users every month to find those learning opportunities. If they clicked on something, it takes them to that teachable moment that tells them what they should be looking for. We have really good email filtering out at our edge to block a lot of that. We block 67% of the email that comes to the state because it's got unwanted content or it's got malicious content. We do a fairly good job at that, but some of that's going to get through. The smart guys know how to get around those defenses. So having that informed workforce, that educated workforce is critical. And then on the reactive side, we've got technologies in place like EDR, things like that, the endpoint detect and response, which uses analytics and behavioral detections to pick out things that are odd. Suddenly a user starts encrypting a whole bunch of files. Well, that's probably ransomware. So, understanding what's normal in your environment, reacting to what's not normal in your environment, it is key in stopping things like ransomware, because every day for us is 0 day. The threats aren't signature based anymore. You can't just throw a signature at something and figure you're going to find the bad stuff. Every day is 0 day. We've got threats that appear to rewrite themselves every 2 hours to where you're not going to detect them with signature-based defenses. You've got to be behavioral. You got to know what's normal in your network, and you got to respond to it when it's not behaving in a normal manner. And then the last point is recovery, and that's having a really strong business continuity plan. Multiple paths of recovery that's not connected at all times, because the bad guys are going to go after not only your live data, but your backup data. If they can't get to it, they can't get to it. So you've got that recovery parachute sitting off site. So having, a multi-pronged recovery strategy in your business continuity plan, where you've got multiple backups, maybe you've got backups that aren't connected, that are sitting off site in a safe somewhere. Just having alternate paths of recovery is key too. And at the state, we have backup strategies that are multi-layers deep that gives us kind of that buffer. And I would encourage anybody out there to develop that same kind of plan and take that backup off-site, protect it so it's not connected where it can get hit as well.
What about what we've learned from like the Kentucky Unemployment Office hacks? I mean, we've seen them across the country. The unemployment sites were being hacked on a routine basis. What would you say are some of the takeaways for state governments?
Well, and using the word hack may be a little bit extreme, because that kind of brings to the point that they've circumvented defenses. What they've done is they've committed fraud, and that's a different thing. Now, there's been some hacking and stuff to that. There's been some things that have occurred across the nation. But really, it gets back to the identity, strengthening your identity validation, making sure that when Bob Smith is connecting in, it's really Bob Smith. You know, having good controls that bounce it off of multiple data sources like Experian, and you know, of course, then you have the problem of people can't remember what color car they drove in 1972, but that's okay. You know, you can tune those services to be more user friendly, but still get the job done. Using things like bot prevention, techniques that get in front of automated, you know, processes where people are trying to guess people's passwords. That's a common approach that's used when there's mass fraud going on. Having things in place that prevent that automation from being successful is a good way to make them move on to easier targets. It's not really making you stronger, but it's making you less desirable. So, you know, hackers, fraudsters are generally lazy. They want the easy work. That's why they do what they do. They don't want real jobs. They want something easy to do. So if you make yourself less desirable, they may move on to somebody else. So those are just a couple of the points that I would bring up. But there's lots that we learned from the pandemic, especially around things like legacy technology, because most of the nations, there was some states that were more modernized than others, but a lot of people were dealing with systems that were old and not really built to handle the level of load that was thrown at them through the pandemic. And nobody would have predicted that this is truly a once in a lifetime thing that nobody had predicted.
What about solar winds and what we can learn from them about the third-party issues? James, you want to address, you know, the importance of the third-party risk management steps?
Yeah, I think the SolarWinds and even more recently the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities show that no system is foolproof. I mean, a lot of people relied on SolarWinds for their network monitoring and other tools. And it shows that any tool that you have in your toolkit, any piece of software you have on your network, could potentially lead to a major breach. And luckily for us, it did not, but for many other government and civilian agencies, it did. So like David was saying, you have to make yourself more resilient. You have to make yourself the highest hanging fruit. Always improve your logging, your security, your controls, implement modern tools like EDR and the modern SIMs. Just do everything you can to make yourself less of a target. So when something like SolarWinds came around, which Metro did have at the time, you aren't a desirable target because they want something easy and quick, not something they have to work a long time for.
What are you seeing, you know, in terms of the situations you deal with in the DHS Cyber Advisor program? But beyond ransomware, what are some of the weaknesses that we have to shore up in our critical infrastructure?
I think that, you know, both James and David have touched on it. It's really, you know, the supply chain. It's really making sure that, you know, nobody can protect their kingdom by themselves anymore. It's a group effort. You know, that whole it takes a village kind of mentality. I want to touch on what David said a little bit there, is that, you know, you've got to make sure that the person on the other end of the computer is who you thought it was. When I was with the DOD, you know, we called ourselves information assurance, not information security. And there was a reason for that, because here, you know, in information security, you're worried about the triad, you know, confidentiality, availability, and integrity. But with information assurance, there was actually, it was a quad. It was confidentiality, availability, integrity, and non-repudiation. That was the fourth pillar that we used in the DoD, is that you had to be able to trust that the thing that you were talking to was actually what you were talking to, that everybody, the validation of the person or the identity of the server was exact. That was a huge thing for us. And I think that's got to bleed over into the private industry, is that we've got to be able to trust everything that we connect with. You have to be able to validate that. And that's where the supply chain comes in. You have to look at how you're entering into contracts. You have to, you know, don't just trust that somebody else is going to do security. You're going to have to actually validate it. You're going to have to do a little legwork on your own. You're going to have to make sure, you know, just don't, you know, accept it, you know, say, hey, I need to see your last scan results. I need to I need to exercise with you. I need to talk for us to talk about what the security handoffs are going to be when we have an incident. How are we going to communicate with each other? What's the fallout going to be? You know, we're talking about a domino effect where when one organization gets hit, it's going to impact every organization around it. You can look at Colonial Pipeline as an example of that. They were a transportation industry and they got taken down, which caused an energy issue, which then impacted back to the transportation, you know, community, where we couldn't have planes in the air or ambulances on the ground. We were running out of gas, you know, which then caused commercial, you know, trucking to go down, which then we looked at manufacturing. We couldn't get goods and services from one place to another, which then also impacted emergency services. So it was a, you know, a kaleidoscope of failure that started to happen because one organization got hit. So we have to kind of look at that from a cybersecurity. Who do we depend on? Who do we rely on? What are our external dependencies for our cybersecurity program? And how are we building relationships with those people? How are we making sure that I understand what their weaknesses are, or what their patch program looks like? You know, how do I make sure that something that they're doing to their system, or if something happens to their system, it's not going to impact me? You know, because I have my own schedules to keep. We have our own, you know, integrity to look at, our own logistics that we have to deal with, and an impact to any part of your supply chain, whether it be because they're attacking you directly or using your trusted connections to send malware over, you know, from that direction as well. You have to be able to counter for all of that. So you can't just keep your blinders on and say, I can only take care of my own networks right now. You have to be concerned with what's happening on everybody else's network too.
We're still hearing discussion on election security. David, did you want to make a few comments about the election security and Kentucky, and, you know, what should we still pay attention to?
Well, election security in Kentucky really doesn't fall within my office, but we leverage strong partnerships. And I think that's where the most value comes out of the group effort that goes into election security, because it's a technology thing, it's a physical security thing, it's a public relations thing. There's so many moving parts to elections because it's the cornerstone of what makes America great. You know, we have to take it seriously from every angle. So we leverage partnerships throughout the election cycles with our state board of elections, with my office, with Homeland Security, with our Kentucky National Guard. Everybody plays a role. Nobody can do everything because there are disconnects there. But having that team approach with the right agreements in place where you can work together efficiently, effectively, it has been tremendous, and it's produced much better, more secure elections for the state, and glad we're part of it. But a lot of the credit goes to our state board of elections, how seriously they take the security of their elections, and how serious we all do that are part of that partnership.
Clint, we're going to start seeing more dollars from the federal government flow into cybersecurity. Where do you think that we're going to see at the federal level, you know, some of the pockets of money being spent? Do you want to talk a little bit about the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission and some of their recommendations?
And Clint, I have some account numbers if you'd like to make some direct deposits.
Yeah, I do as well, sir.
I think that everybody has those account numbers waiting for, you know, what we're going to do with all of that. The first thing I'll point out is one of the big changes, especially from the federal government standpoint, is the cybersecurity coordinator positions that, you know, have been created by the Department of Homeland Security, actually by Congress, and will be fulfilled by the Department of Homeland Security. Colin Glover is actually on board now in the state of Kentucky. He is the cybersecurity coordinator for the state of Kentucky and will be handling state and local governments with a focus, of course, on election infrastructure and, you know, state and local government issues. So that's a real big win for us right there, is to have a dedicated resource for you in Kentucky to be able to work with. Where I was always busy, you know, covering 8 states. You know, now I've got all the help. I've got one person per state, you know, especially to focus on this big issue. As far as, you know, the other things out there, I mean, the big things that we're seeing from the federal level, of course, always misinformation campaigns. But the dollars that are out there, of course, you're gonna have to go through the grant program in order to get them, but they really want to create a more robust cybersecurity program. They want organizations to be able to update, their VPN connections, or to look at how they're going to make, the public feel better. Because I actually think, along with, when Director Krebs back in the day, when he got in front of Congress, said, I think that this election was safe and secure. I'm right there with him. I've seen these systems, I've seen that the way the program works, and the people who run those programs have such a passion for it. Of course, they want their party to win, but none of them are willing to upset, the democratic process in order to make that happen. I mean, that's the beauty of this, is that everybody loves democracy. And so I think that system really works.
I'd like to.
David, yeah, I was
Sorry.
just going to say, maybe you could tell us a little bit about where we need to, put dollars in the state.
Well, first I want to say how impressed I am with the federal mindset now when it comes to how they're trying to help the states. Historically, the grant opportunities were kind of constrained. They were really kind of targeting specific things, which was kind of constraining. And now I think our federal partners are looking at us more openly, saying, hey, look, you all know what you're dealing with. You know what your gaps are. We're going to open up opportunities for grant funding that is more broad, that allows you to sell to us what your gaps are and apply for the funding to help you close those gaps. To me, that's a tremendous win for the states, because now we don't have to depend on the feds guessing at what we need. They're allowing us to be more definitive about our security programs, able to really reach out for the funding to help us fill the gaps that we have. And every state out there has them. And they're different, and it varies from state to state. So having that flexibility and that openness is tremendous. And we're going to be taking advantage of that as well. And it's going to be focused more on increasing the analytics and the artificial intelligence or machine learning or whatever buzzwords you want to put around it. It's about making your security more intelligent on its own. Threat actors now are not, like I said, they're not sounding the trumpets and beating down your gates. They're coming in as things that are trusted in your environment, that belong in your environment, but they're behaving in a way they're not supposed to. So having the artificial intelligence or the analytics or whatever you want to call it, that understands that network baseline and then picks up on the deviations and can either proactively stop it or reactively report on it, whatever it takes to gain the intelligence about what is really going on in your environment and what things are deviating from that baseline. That's kind of where the focus is going to be as we're looking to our federal partners for some additional funding.
Make some comments.
So for me, I think the cool thing is I read just yesterday that members of Congress were talking about a new grant funding program that was solely focused on cybersecurity. In the past, there were limitations where a grant, it was harder to get, and it could be used for cybersecurity or physical security or boats or, cameras or any other thing. The cool thing is that this program they're talking about now is solely focused on cybersecurity. So I think the legislators are finally getting it. And as David alluded to, they're going to let us tell them what we need as opposed to dictating what they think we need.
And I think that's an important piece too, is because from our standpoint, you have 50 states and you have 50 different, election systems. Actually, in some states, like Tennessee, for example, every county is allowed to choose the election system that they want to use. So in Tennessee, you might have even 50 different, election systems within Tennessee. So allowing the states to have that flexibility to say, this is what works for us. You can't define, so the federal government shouldn't define how we do elections. It should be a state issue. And I think that's what we're starting to learn at the federal level, is to say, hey, here's the money to do what you need to do in a secure fashion. So that the process can continue on how the states feel it's best to continue.
The U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission, I think, has put out 80 recommendations, and if anybody's interested, that is at solarium.gov. You can read the entire report that came out last year, but there's still a tremendous amount of work around critical infrastructure. I wanted, Clint, just give us a quick view of the work that DHS Cyber Advisor program gives us. What is that for the corporate and small business side? What are some of the things that you offer?
So from the Cybersecurity Advisor and the Cybersecurity Coordinator program, we offer a chance to actually partner up with the federal government to bring us in and show us how you're operating, and then let us also give you, exactly as our title states, advice. Allow us to be an advisory role for you. We're a free resource. I can use that term loosely. We're a taxpayer-funded resource to be able to come in and assist you. We have lots of assessments that can help you figure out where your baseline for cybersecurity is, how mature your program is, and how your program can mature again over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. We have tactical level tools that we can do for you, such as vulnerability scanning, phishing campaigns, remote penetration tests that can help you determine where the holes in your organization are and can help you develop a get well plan. We can come in and assist you with exercises. We love to do that. We love to exercise with our partners. So if you need us to facilitate your exercise or just give you scenarios, if you need us to introduce you to the Secret Service or the FBI to exercise with you, or your local law enforcement, or if you want to create an ecosystem exercise, such as working with other people in your industry, or you want to say, I want to do a community exercise, working with my local government, or working with my infrastructure providers, my vendors and suppliers, we can help put all of that together. We can also perform workshops and training and awareness, for your organization. We can come in and hold resilience workshops, or we can do specific workshops, like if you need incident response or asset management, situational awareness workshops. We can assist you with all of that and help you get a better program, or help you educate your workforce or your end users so that you feel more secure in what you're doing. We can be that extra party that comes in and gives you that outside voice of reason. Should incidents happen, you can give us a call and we can try and assist you over the phone, or we can help you with malware analysis. We have a plethora of services that we really want to bring to bear, and there's no charge for anything that we do other than the time it takes you to reach out to us. I apologize, my allergies are going nuts today.
I was hoping, David, you could give us a quick overview of like the Fusion Center, and there is a state cyber work group under Philip Ross. Could you give us a quick look at what the state is up to in terms of supporting small business and manufacturers, et cetera?
Well, there's challenges between the state being able to support small businesses. There's legislative things that are probably needed. There's legal agreements that are probably needed. There's still work to be done. But the Cyber Threat Working Group is a good step in the right direction. It's a collective group of government resources, military, FBI, local businesses, big businesses in the state, education. It's a very diverse collection of individuals that get together on a monthly basis to talk about the state of security, what we're seeing, what are we doing, how we're responding to things, trends. It's an excellent opportunity for us to share information between the resources at the state and those at the local business level. Bringing value like the FBI, the Homeland Security, lots of good, valuable information gets shared at all levels in that group. So that's been a huge win for us. One of the key things that does, though, is that opens the opportunity and conduits for communication in the event that somebody has an incident. So they can leverage that group to reach out to the expertise that's in the other areas amongst the people in that group and say, hey, how can I help? What can I do to help address this? What can I do? What should my strategy be after I recover? How do I keep this from happening again? And there's been occasions where we've been able to share some guidelines and guidance on business continuity after the fact. You know, after you get things back up and running, after you get things back in place, how do you prevent yourself from being a victim again? So there's lots of value to that group. We're hoping to do more with that group. But right now it is really just a collective of like-minded people that share common passions and common threats, and the ability for us to share that information freely between each other. So it's a really great group. And if anybody's interested in participating, we certainly would be open to more people.
Yeah, can you put the information in the chat box for that when you have a chance?
It's good to have people like David to reach out to if something goes wrong or if you have a question. That's what that group facilitates. So absolutely, if you're interested in joining a group of like-minded individuals, please send us your information. We'd love to have you.
Yes, and Clint, you can put your information in the chat box as well, just so they have a contact point. But James, you're also in a dual role with the National Guard, and you work in that space of cybersecurity. What are some of the things National Guard provides and does for us in cybersecurity?
So this is emerging capability for us, but one of the things we want to do is to start helping smaller governments that don't have the financial or the operational capability to help themselves to do things like Clint was talking about at the state level, to do some assessments, to do vulnerability scans, to give them a roadmap for making their cybersecurity program more modern. That's one of the big things to do. And of course, we work, to protect the National Guard network and things like that. But we want to expand into, the cities and counties that may not have the financial capabilities to protect themselves. We want to go out and help them, put the roadmap out to things they need to do to help themselves.
So as we maybe go step back a bit and look at some of these third-party vendors like Microsoft and so on, and what they're doing and saying as we have been spending so much time in remote work. What are we hoping from these players, the largest of players like Microsoft? This discussion around confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Where do you interface with some of those types of situations and kind of impact does this have on you?
Yeah, so I've learned that really no piece of software is to be trusted. And if you, as a CISO, David, myself, Clint as an advisor, you have to really take the stance that all these software vendors, even with their best intents, are going to put a flawed product out there. And there's going to be a way to take advantage of that product to get into your network. So we take a zero trust stance on all this software. We patch as soon as we can, but we assume that there are flaws we don't know about. So we put other controls in place to support that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Because if you assume the software is flawed to begin with, you can better prepare yourself for when it actually reveals itself to be flawed.
How does zero trust affect you? Like when you think of zero trust, what comes to mind for your organization?
I'll say
for David.
Zero trust is a little more of a challenge. There's political boundaries, territorial boundaries. There's things that make zero trust hard to implement at the state level. So we're probably not fully zero trust, but we're probably more constrained trust. We have better knowledge of what systems need to talk to what systems. We have multiple layers of firewalls in between things. And they're next generation firewalls. They're intelligent firewalls that aren't just stateful block and IP type firewalls. They're firewalls that have some intelligence to them, that understand the communication flow and can react to things that are not normal. So while I would love to be 100% zero trust, because I'm a CISO, I trust no one. That's my job. But we have to work with what we have, and I think we've done a really good job of segmentation. and we've got strategy to do things better. As far as the software goes, I agree with James 100%. I think the SolarWinds thing really was a game changer, even though this has been a game that's been going on for a long time. It really brought to the surface that software in your environment isn't to be trusted. They've got great products. They've all, there's a lot of people that use them. That shows how things can be side loaded into your environment that you're not aware of. So in the state, you know, I've stood up. I say I stood up. I've got a very talented team that did this. They established a very good penetration testing program inside of ourselves. Instead of relying on a third party to come in and do it periodically, we're continuously looking at our environment, digging under all the rocks to find the bad stuff, to find the vulnerabilities. We've ramped up our enterprise threat management program. We're really stepping up, looking at everything in our environment down to the smallest detail.
If you look at telework, are there certain tips or tricks that you would recommend, Clint? Because we see that people are used to the idea of telework now, and they want to stay in these remote environments, but that presents a challenge as we step forward for all the cyber attack scenarios that we see. What should we be focusing on as business people?
Oh, so from a business perspective, I think that the endpoint detection and behavioral, information is what you really want to look at. What time are people logging in? What are they touching when they're coming through? Once again, zero trust. Give them only access to the things that they need access to, especially from a remote. From a personal standpoint, you should be looking at your home network as an extension of your work network. You need to segment your home network. Have your work PC on a separate dedicated VLAN on your router. I mean, just about every router out there now allows you to segment the network. You need to have your work PC set up separate from everything else you have. You need to take your time and effort and due diligence to patch your home systems as well. That Nest thermostat, that Ring doorbell, that smart TV, all those things have patches and updates that need to happen. They're all running on your wire. Your cell phone, get rid of apps that you don't need anymore. Really start to say that, hey, if the threat actors are going to start targeting me as an individual, me as a user, whether it be at my home or whether it be at my work, I want to minimize the impact if they happen to get into my systems. I won't want them to be able to jump from one to another or to use one of my systems to leverage against the others. But from once again, back to the work standpoint, you really just got to know what your users are doing. You got to baseline. And that's the big thing with the way that we dispersed our workforce, is that we didn't do a new baseline. We didn't have time to baseline, back when all this happened, but now we have the time. People need to start baselining. What does the traffic look like? How much bandwidth are they going to use? What are they going to be pushing through? How can we do things? How can we leverage the cloud to assist us in all of this? So because believe it or not, once again, it's a supply chain issue, and you have all these different connections going to all these different places. How do they need to pull the data down? But how do they need to pull the data down securely? Does it go through your pipe? Does it go through a dedicated connection between you and the cloud? So you really need to look, once again, it's time for us to get away from that old model. We've been saying this for years, is that we needed to look at all the advances we've made in networking and network technology, yet we're still doing the old way of networking. Now we have a chance to reinvent ourselves. And I think most organizations take advantage of this time to say, the old model of doing business is dead. We need to re-architect, re-engineer, and now is the time to spend the time, money, and effort to do all that, so that we plan for a dispersed workforce and we have baseline on expected activity.
James, do you see much of that in the local government? Are we seeing more people wanting to continue telework and
Oh yeah.
dealing with the VPN idea? Can you kind of talk about how that might, be something you're looking at?
Oh yeah, we do see a lot of that, and we luckily had a pretty good VPN system in place before COVID hit. As a security professional, one of the things that was very, very key for me is making sure we were logging the right things. So the shift from working on site to telework brought a whole new set of identity and access logs that we needed to make sure that we covered into our logging system so that we didn't miss things that were different between working on site and working telework. But our office personally went from 85 people on 2 floors to now on average we're about 11 people. So a lot of our office is going to be telework still. So 75-80% are still going to telework because they don't need to be there, and we have to address those challenges by implementing new controls, making sure we log the right things, and just being resilient to change like this.
David, what about SSL and some of the things you have to deal with at the state level for remote work with worker level people?
Well, again, it gets back to validating the identity. If you're going to be working with a remote workforce, technologies like multi-factor authentication are a must. You can't do it without it because you don't have any validation of who's logging in. People can spoof IP addresses. They can masquerade. They can rewrite packet headers to look like they're coming from anywhere. So you can't just geolocate. You can't just based on some of that normal type stuff. You have to validate the identity and ensuring that Bob Smith is Bob Smith. And then to James' point, you got to know what your people are doing, and Clint's point as well. You've got to know what your people are doing. You got to look for anomalies. You got to be able to not only detect them but respond to them quickly, because things in technology happen in milliseconds. It's a threat gets in your environment. It can move rampant in seconds, not minutes, not hours, not days. So having the intelligence and the actionable information at hand to be able to respond to anomalies in your network is critical. So having a good security incident and event management system that can apply the appropriate analytics to things to be able to prioritize the work that you're doing, because you can get alert fatigue. You can get so much stuff thrown at you at one time that you get nothing done. So having a good security incident and event management system that can help you prioritize the work that you're doing, to help measure the level of risks of the events that are occurring in your environment, so you focus on those things that are most important, is critical. Because a lot happens and it happens fast. So the only way that you can apply the right people to the right jobs is to have something help them pick out what is most important for them to focus on.
So Clint, as we look at policies that people should have in their small businesses, what are some of the gaps that you've seen and places that people could really improve as it relates to the corporate and small business level?
Oh, the big one that I see is, we deal with a lot of this is number one, a policy on the expectation of privacy on the network. Most organizations don't know, especially as we, the Department of Homeland Security come in to try and help them. If they don't have a definite policy on the expectation of privacy for their users, then we can't touch the system because, we're not allowed to, quote unquote, spy on U.S. citizens. So if the users think that they have an expectation of privacy on that network, then we can't touch it. So there has to be a definite, yes, anything you do on this is, the company's property, or, the company can monitor it and things like that. That's a big thing. But then the other thing we see is acceptable use policy. What are you allowed to do and not do with the company issued IT stuff? Are you allowed to surf the web on your free time? Are you allowed to pay your bills with that? We're starting to see a day and age where everything out there is a vulnerability. So allowing people to do anything other than work on their work issued stuff, just really needs to be stopped. The zero trust is more than just a networking model. It's a model for how you should be doing businesses that say only business stuff should happen. We can't get a good baseline of what our network looks like if we're allowing people to surf the web or to watch YouTube or to pull Netflix up or to check their own email account from our work. I mean, people have their own cell phone sitting next to them. Let them do that stuff from their cell phone, not from your work PC or not from their laptop. Don't let them do anything other than work stuff on there. But you also need to have, policy, identity and access management, two-factor authentication. Those are the big policies that you absolutely have to have. You have to figure out how you're going to do this, identity and access management, how you're going to, manage yourself with your clients and your partners and your cloud services. And the last thing I'll touch on is really just that your contracts with your cloud services need to specifically state, or within your vendors and suppliers, your security requirements. You need to outline your security requirements in contract language. I actually got to watch a great presentation at the last conference I went to, where a CEO from a bank up in Ohio was talking about, he was trying to get the cloud service providers to put security into the contract language. They kept saying, here's our white paper on security. He's like, good, I want you to put what's in that white paper into the contract. And they said, well, we can't do that. And he's like, well, then your white paper is about as good as toilet paper to me. He's like, I need you to put it in contract. I need you to actually work with me on this. Security has to be part of what you do, not just, it's in everything that we do. It can't just be part of the thing that you supply when you feel like, or when it works for you. I need it to work for me too. Remember, it's your data. You've got to protect it regardless of who else is doing the work for you.
Yes, and James, I bet you see that when you negotiate your service level agreements for local government. Are there any tips or thoughts that you have for small business owners from your own experience, that things they need to look at in contracts as it relates to policies and procedures?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would say is don't be afraid to tell a vendor or a provider no if they don't meet your policies. I mean, like Clint and David have alluded to, you have to have those policies in place first. But one of the things I've had to teach some of the purchasing people in Metro was that if they don't meet our standards, I don't care how good their program is, if they have outdated software on their network, if they've recently been hacked, if they won't answer our security questionnaires, don't be afraid to tell them no. And then changing that culture with the purchasers and the agency directors that are buying these services is taking a long time, but they're finally starting to get it. I mean, you have to hold your ground and be firm and tell these people, do you want to be the next Atlanta or Baltimore or Anchorage or any, the pipeline, any of these other recent attacks? Do you want to be them? Because if you engage in this vendor, we could be them.
Well, David, how do you build cyber leaders across all these state agencies? I mean, isn't that, it's kind of difficult, but I know you have certain policies and procedures you work with to try and get those people to speak every once in a while.
Well, and we've got some agencies that have their own cyber analyst type folks in the agency, but that's few and far between. That's our larger agencies that have those capabilities, that have the depth of staff to be able to do that. Our smaller agencies don't, and they rely on my office a lot. So it's right now we rely on the fact that we have IT leads at every one of our agencies that is a direct conduit back to technology. So if they have security concerns, or if they have things where they need additional guidance, interpretation of our policies, they've got those direct pipelines back to the expertise on our side to get that. One of the things that we've also done is we have a chief compliance officer now. Before, both risk management and compliance management were under me. That's a pretty heavy load. That's kind of hard to carry in a state government the size of Kentucky. The Commonwealth goes through approximately 26 audits every year. We're assessed by multiple people, from the federal government to individual data owners that have data sharing agreements with the state. Everybody wants to protect their data, and they want to know how we're protecting it. So separating compliance out, that gives focus on the compliance area, where agencies that have those compliance needs can work directly with the team that will help them meet those needs. And then on the risk management side, we can be more proactive about giving real directed guidance on how to do things securely and safely, and also give them response capabilities that are more targeted on that, instead of being distracted by audit, as well as trying to manage risk in the environment. So far that's been a real win for us. But as far as the expertise in the agencies, we've got a few agencies that are doing it really well. And for those that don't, they have the direct pipeline back to the skill and expertise in my office, and we're here for them.
And so we've got to wrap up, but I wanted to ask Clint, as we look to the future, what kind of threats are we going to see, and where are these threats coming from in the world right now? Who are our biggest enemies in terms of, being hackable to others?
Trying to put my forecaster hat on there. You know, that's a tough
You got a
question.
crystal ball. Let me know where
That's
you
right.
got
I want to see the crystal ball.
Yeah, that's the thing with cyber is they always seem to come out of left field. Every time we think that we know which direction everything's going, something new happens. But I think that, you know, we're in a world of constant change, and it's a good change. You know, things that needed to happen are starting to happen. You know, social change, economic change. It's all starting to come down. So I think that, you know, besides the nation states are there's going to have to be a line in the sand drawn saying what's an act of war and what's just, you know, normal espionage sort of things needs to happen. I mean, you can already see that the federal government is looking at calling ransomware an act of terrorism, you know, especially when it hits critical infrastructure. So I think that you're going to see, you know, some of these things happening, but I have a feeling that hacktivism is going to be one of the new things as more and more capabilities start to drift to the end users. You're going to start to see, you know, the criminals and the hacktivists start to get more competent at the tools that are out there. And if people don't start securing their networks, you're going to start to see them having a more defined effect on getting their message out there or trying to get money off of people. So unfortunately, I see that cyber attacks are going to only continue to increase. Business email compromise is still number one. Everybody talks about ransomware, but it's business email compromise is still number one out there and what we're seeing. But you're starting to see this, you know, this trend of denial of service attacks coming in too, especially against, you know, large parts of the interweb, or, you know, these large, you know, providers and carriers out there. I think what a lot of people don't realize too is that, you know, during that, you know, whole SolarWinds thing, that Microsoft was one of the companies that got hit. And it wasn't just Microsoft, you know, some of their, you know, the intellectual property was stolen. And a lot of that intellectual property that was stolen was around their cloud services and cloud service security. So I think you're going to start seeing, you know, that old adage of why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. I think you're going to start seeing cloud security attacks. I think your organizations, especially the nation state actors, are going to go after where everybody's storing their data, and that's the cloud. So I think you're going to start to see all of that ramp up. You're going to have to start to see a definite look at two-factor authentication being the norm rather than the exception. And insurance companies are going to start turning away people who aren't doing the minimums around two-factor authentication and network segmentation in order to maintain that whole industry. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope it all just goes away. You know, I would love to be out of a job. I tell people that every day. I would love to not have anything to work for because that means we have a safe and secure internet, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's only going to get worse before it gets better. And I think because those tools are starting to move down from nation states to criminal actors, and now we're going to see hacktivists. And let's hope that terrorism doesn't, you know, jump into that ring as well.
Well, that certainly has given us a lot to think about. So I want to thank our panelists today for their inputs, and hopefully you've gotten some good information out of this and start looking at how you internally in your organizations can do a better job at data care.